newsrooms, you know you're always chasing the breaking story, whatever's happening. It's stressful, it's high pressure, there's, enterprise stories are in the works, whatever, but really like how can we get beyond this, at least for some of our goals and thinking, so that we can keep moving towards the big, hairy, audacious goals, so we can do the audience research, so we can think about the products. The idea here is to, again, kind of adopt like a roadmap practice, right? Again, this is, all tech companies kind of have their roadmaps. They organize, things into sprints. They're usually 1 or 2 weeks. They kind of map out what are their resources, how much they can get done. They kick it off. They do all the work. They show off what they do at the end of it, and they keep iterating and going from there, and kind of have, the sprint goal, the month goal, the quarterly goal, the yearly goal.
Building on that point, Amy Webb used to talk about presentism. She used to always talk at this conference, those who have been here for a while at ONA. She talked about the bias towards presentism, like we're so focused on what we're doing this week and this month, and we're missing like what's going to be happening next year and 2 years and 3 years. So that roadmap kind of mentality. I just saw a stat that the large AI companies are spending typically 10 to 20% of their overall kind of budgets towards R&D. Like they're really thinking ahead. They're thinking long term. They're thinking about big picture, and news organizations, again, generalizing here tremendously, but by and large, news organizations are so focused on putting out fires in the next day and the next week and this quarter that we're kind of missing an opportunity, I think, to some extent, to do some of that big picture thinking, at least periodically, to be more proactive than reactive.
Some companies even put these things out publicly and let people see exactly what they're working on and what they're planning for the future. They sometimes do it on GitHub, where they post their code. You can actually literally see what they're working on, or people will use like Trello and other platforms to actually put out roadmaps, potentially even let people vote on features that they would like to see, things like that. So again, here there isn't always, we tend to be very secretive and it has to be perfect before we share it with the public. That's kind of what you're trained often as journalists, but I think there is value in some of this and being more public with it and sharing it with people, and kind of, again, building supporters to your cause, rallying a movement around what you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay. Create space for breakthrough ideas. So this is something that we at HacksHackers have been doing for many years. Again, kind of riffing off what the tech industry does. So basically, internal or external hackathons. So we've done many of these hackathons. And it's regularly done in Silicon Valley. Some products that you heard of have come out of hackathons, basically. I mean, remember Google had their 20% time, right, where they would give people a day to do whatever they want to. I don't think they do that anymore, cost cutting, and such even comes to the big tech companies. But I mean, think about how can you give people, again, because we're stuck in the news cycle, worried about, tomorrow's whatever is going to happen, getting the story out, how can you give people a bit of space to really think blue sky about what's going on? Bring together different teams, actually, is something else to really think about. I think the next slide, I kind of have a different, some tips for this. So, the key for these hackathons, part of why they work, actually the magic is you don't have much time to do anything. I mean, we've done them as short as 1 day. You could do it for 2 days. You could do it over a week. Sometimes, companies will do this for internal hackathons. Google has a whole sprint book actually talking about
John
this.
Zaretsky and Jake Knapp have a book called Sprint. Highly recommend it. It's got a formula for this. It's very readable. It's friendly. It's fun. It's got a lot of good examples.
But part of the magic is in the constraint. It is because you have limited time, limited resources. It kind of forces you to be creative, do things differently, figure out something that's going to work. And really the goal is people can pitch projects, they can throw out all sorts of crazy ideas, and then at the end they have to actually demo something, right? Actually show something that can work, which I think also with AI, vibe coding, all the new tools we have, you could actually build pretty amazing things in very short amounts of time. So, I mean, that's part of this, bringing people together from different teams, like definitely hugely important. There's kind of magic in radical collaboration, as the Stanford D School calls it, like even telling the teams, I mean, this could be a requirement. Teams must have, one journalist, one business person, one tech person and kind of forcing that to happen. You can use your user research that you've done because you did that from the earlier slide, right? And think about some of these problems. We actually did one hackathon in Minnesota where we went to the newspaper conference and got a bunch of publishers from newspapers all over the state to kind of talk about things they wanted to be built. And then we took those videos to University of Minnesota and played them back for all these students and developers and everybody, and they actually ended up building some of those ideas for those people. That was really cool.
Okay, next one is about squeezing more juice from every story. One of the assets that many news organizations have, arguably most news organizations have, is a remarkably rich reservoir of material, articles, videos, past social posts. There's so much rich material that we have in our archives and in what we've published in the past. And we generally have a lot of material that's not evergreen. But I would argue that, depending on and this depends obviously a lot on the specific context, the specific kind of news organization, et cetera. But I would argue there's a surprising amount of material in many archives that actually is evergreen, that is relevant long past the original time when it was created. And yet, most of that never sees the light of day again, right, I would argue. And I think we now have the opportunity, with the benefit of AI, to make more use of material that we've created in the past, invested a lot into, and yet sits dormant in the archives, unused. And some of that is in terms of the present stories, right, in the form of repurposing. I think it's interesting here in the Canva Lounge, one of the themes I've heard is this idea of repurposing, repackaging, turning one thing into many different formats, which is now more possible than ever with a variety of different tools. But I would argue also resurrecting, right, bringing stuff back, that phenomenal interview with this creator, right, who created this, whatever it might have been, right, an artist, a musician, a writer in the community, or in some expert on the topic of whatever we're focusing on, or an incident, obviously the Hurricane Katrina, there was a panel about that, that just going back into the archives and looking at material on the occasion of anniversaries. And we can now set up some workflows where AI can really help us with that, right? It can sort of draw on the archives and say, hey, this might be relevant to something you're working on now, or this might be relevant to an anniversary or something that's happening this time of year, or some development in the news, right? There's various different ways it can connect to either external events, internal developments in terms of what you're actually covering. That can be useful as an internal tool, right, to signal, hey, this is relevant material you can draw on. I just spoke with somebody from La Nación, right? The AI team there has an internal tool where they can basically search their internal archive, right, for any relevant coverage they've done on the subject in the past, and just look at that past coverage and say, like, oh yeah, we covered this. This is what the person said the last time we spoke to them. We should reach back out and do a new interview, et cetera. So it could be an internal use. It doesn't always have to be repurposing or resurrecting for public distribution. It could be for internal use and internal reporting purposes, but also the external value of just having more good quality content. Finding a great image. That's another tool they're working on, is finding images from the archive. They have a huge archive of fantastic photography, and now they can draw on that archive of photography for a new story they're working on, which is really valuable, right? And saves the time of a photo editor, but also just gives them new ideas about ways they could visually illustrate something they're working on with actual human photography, right? Their own work, it's their own archive, but making more use of that archive. So I think that's a really valuable opportunity for us going into 2026.